Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
I'm Sonia Strimban.
Today we're looking at Winter Light.
Det började i våras. Jonas läste i tidningarna om kineserna. Det stod att kineserna uppfostras till hat. Det stod att det är en tidsfråga innan kineserna har atombomber. De har ingenting att förlora. Så stod det. Jag oroar mig ju inte så mycket, men det kanske beror på att jag inte har så mycket fantasi. Men Jonas, han tänker jämt. Och vi vänder och vrider. Och jag kan ju inte hjälpa så mycket. Vi har ju 3 barn och så den som kommer.
Ja. Vi går ju alla med samma rädsla. Mer eller mindre. Vi måste lita på Gud.
This is the second of a trilogy that Bergman released, and they all deal with faith. In fact, it's known as a trilogy of faith. This one we found a bit challenging.
Yeah, I think me in particular, it was not a favorite of mine, and I found it quite long and not particularly engaging and rather tedious, if I could find a word to describe it.
Yeah, and I think that this one in particular has a lot of background to it, meaning that I think a lot of what Bergman was going through at the time in terms of his career really played into this film in some ways that it hasn't until this point. We're coming off of 2 Best Foreign Film Oscar wins. His career is basically in his hands, as in ways that it hasn't been at this point. And he's able to make what he wants, which is always a challenge with any studio, but especially in Sweden, it seems, at the time. And he really created something that I think, in my opinion at least, is maybe what Bergman wanted to see in a film, because it felt like he made this movie for himself.
He sure did. I don't know. I guess when you have that kind of license and that kind of creative freedom, my desire would have been to see something more. And especially coming after Through a Glass Darkly, which was so rich and ripe with such nuanced work. This one for me was just flat at best.
Yeah, I think that really came down to the pacing. That was something that we talked about during the film because we were having some trouble watching it. It's about 80 odd minutes, but it felt like it was 2 hours.
It sure did.
And I think that a lot of that had to do with what was going on with the characters and the actors. In my opinion, they didn't really capture the performances as well as maybe they could have. Gunnar Bornstrand was sick during the filming of this movie, and it apparently really impacted his performance and his ability to, I guess, emote in front of the camera because he felt like he was going to heave. And maybe I'm presuming a little bit.
He did look quite ill, but I mean, and it was written into the character itself. And I think his kind of lifelessness was also supposed to be part of the character, but just the overall flatness of the movie, I felt like it was really stripped from a lot of the kind of rich elements and cinematography that we typically enjoy from Bergman. Like the set was really barren, the characters were really unattractive, intentionally so. Just everything was bleak and frozen and lifeless. And I mean, Bergman films aren't typically reputed for being frivolous and witty and charming, but this one in particularly was quite grim.
Yeah, it was very dark, and I think there's certain stylistic choices that you can see. For example, he chose not to have the camera move particularly often, which when you're watching it makes it a little bit boring when it's so consistent.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of those shots that really popped. Usually Bergman has a bunch of those.
And he always pays attention to the score. Like the music is always interesting, or at least it comes in at unique moments in the film and really amplifies something, whereas here the movie was practically silent.
Right. Winter Light is one of those movies that really seems to have divided people because some people really think this is one of his best.
I mean, Gunnar Bjorstrand, despite being ill, I think still delivered a really solid performance. But I couldn't connect with him, you know? And it's interesting to think when if this is a trilogy of faith and the crises of faith that people experience, it's definitely kind of an interior crisis of faith, because he's really looking at each individual character's response to the challenges that they face with either their religion or their belief system or whatever the case. And in the previous film, we had Harriet Anderson returning to star, and her female psyche and the challenges that she was going through in comparison to Gunnar Bjornstrand and, you know, the kind of unpacking of his psyche as a male character, I thought there was such a vast difference, and her story was so much better. It was so much more effectively told and so much more intriguing to watch. Like, that film you couldn't walk away from. Whereas
Right.
this film, I couldn't wait for it to stop.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I don't know if it was because Gunnar was sick or just the way that the script was written, but because he is so closed off as a character and as it is designed, how do you connect with the actor when you can't be let into the actor's world? You know what I mean?
But even with Harriet Anderson, like, she was a mad woman, like, she was insane. It's not like you can necessarily relate to her either. I don't think it's about relating to the character.
You have to be
about-
sympathetic.
I think it's all the things combined. It's plot, it's acting, it's characterization, it's even the score. Like, all these things combine to create a peak that you can kind of hang yourself on, you can believe in, you can feel. And this movie,
Didn't have it for you.
didn't happen.
Jag bad om en uppgift för min styrka. Och jag fick den också. Uppgiften är du.
I think one interesting shot in the film was with Ingrid Thulin when she's reading the letter that she wrote to the minister, kind of declaring her love, but at the same time chastising him for not returning her feelings or giving her a lot of mixed signals. And for me, that shot was reminiscent of a very impressive moment in Summer with Monica when we have Harriet Anderson also directly staring into the camera and connecting with the viewer.
The real difference here is that this one's about 5 times longer.
Yes, and filled with her reading this very, again, tedious, quote-unquote, love letter.
You know, the length of it affected my opinion of the performance. In Summer with Monica, for example, it's relatively brief, but in this film, it's a very lengthy reading of the letter. I think at least my attention was sort of drifting at certain points, and you don't have that real connection. I don't know if it was the performance in particular, or
I think it's the whole content of the film. Like, there was never that spark between me and the content of the film, and so when she's reading what's supposed to be this really heartbreaking condemnation, it's falling really flat.
One thing that I think is important to note about this movie is that unlike a lot of other Bergman films, while religion is present here, it's not a film about religion, as some of the others have been at least. It's more about faith.
Faith in what, though? I think that's what the movie is really trying to highlight, is what is it that human beings can have faith in? What can we hold on to? What do we hope for?
Mm-hmm.
And in this movie, I guess that was kind of one of the more interesting elements, is the confusion of the main character, played by Gunnar Bjornstrand, who is a minister. And he's supposed to be kind of like the shepherd of his flock and lead, you know, the people and show them the way and be a shining beacon and example. Meanwhile, he's the one who's having the greatest crisis of faith because, and this is something that Bergman has shown us before, can a belief in a greater being sustain people, you know? And if you don't believe in that greater being, then what is the meaning of your life? So this minister is struggling with, is God real? Is God not real? And if God is not real, what do I do? And I think his confusion and his inability to relate to his own God figure translates into the barrenness of the rest of the film and his congregation and then their ensuing problems. So it's like this larger anxiety that everyone in the film has about life and the meaning of life and can they survive.
To the point where someone actually commits suicide.
Yeah, and that was, you know, it's not like we haven't seen suicide in a Bergman film before, but it usually had a more direct cause and effect kind of situation, like, oh my God, I'm with child and it's not socially acceptable and I'm not married, so I'm going to kill myself or have an abortion that kills me. Whereas in this film we have Max von Sydow, who is a really wholesome man. You know, he's got a wife who loves him, he's got lots of kids, he's got a job. Like, there's no crisis in his life until one day he wakes up and he reads the newspaper and finds out that there's a threat that the Chinese are building nuclear weapons. And all of a sudden this threat of some kind of potential, off in the distance nuclear holocaust becomes the driving force that actually makes him jump in the frozen cold river and kill himself and abandon all the good things in life, which to me seems really foreign. Like, if I had a life that seemed fulfilling and had all the good things in it, how would something that's so theoretical and foreign and unknown drive me to throw everything away?
What really bothered me about this moment in the film is that it didn't really feel anything from it. And we've seen a lot of characters struggle in Bergman films, and we've weighed a lot of issues because of it, but the one that you just discussed didn't affect me. I just kind of watched it happen, and then our main character didn't really have any sort of real impact about it. Maybe he was thinking about it,
and
and it was...
couldn't.
Right. Or
It was like he was impotent to do anything, even though people turned to him as an authority figure. They turned to him as someone who could be a savior in the situation, kind of inject the Max von Sydow character with faith. You know, believe God will, or religion, or your family, or whatever values you attest to, they will get you through this. Nothing bad will happen to you because you're a good man.
But for me, there should be some sort of struggle there that I was feeling of this man trying to feel, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That it should have been a struggle within the self that I understood. Instead, we are left so distant from this possible struggle that it never really left me with you know, the debate that a lot of other Bergman films leave you struggling with after the film and discussing, like we do.
Yeah, it definitely didn't materialize into something tangible.
But one of the things about this movie that I was wondering is, we talked about how he was running on this success and made a film that he probably really wanted to make, but does that make this more art than his other films?
Well, it's definitely not entertainment.
That's the thing. I mean, a lot of other Bergman films, he made the piece that he wanted and then sort of structured entertainment around it. But here he didn't do that. And for us, at least, it seemed to have quite a negative feeling. And I want to clarify, I didn't dislike this film quite as much as you did, because you...
Well, it's not like I go into every Bergman film looking to be entertained. That's not... I'm looking to be challenged. And this film challenged me, but not in the, like, good intellectual kind of way. But I mean, I can understand where you're coming from, because one of the takeaways for me, interestingly enough, was when we did our background reading on the film, was the fact that Bergman and his cinematographer literally spent an entire day, like 14 hours or something, sitting inside this tiny church, watching the sun rise and set, just to be able to track the lighting and the shadows and how they fall, so that they could have that absolute perfection of timing and lighting in the film. Clearly something that, in my opinion, tedious, is perhaps what, for Bergman and his cinematographer, really puts this movie at a higher category of art. And is more significant than, you know, showing Gunner's inner turmoil.
It comes to our ultimate question, is this essential Bergman? Because, I mean, on one hand, this is a certain type of film that he made at a certain period in his life that is significant.
I think this film would be essential for a very small percentage of Bergman fans.
Really?
But for, the ones that are more, you know, into the artistic Bergman.
Okay.
I think for the larger population who want to learn about Bergman in general, no. The only second reason why I hesitate to kind of chuck it out is also because it's part of a trilogy. So I feel like if you were to understand the arc of what he was trying to develop there, it might somehow be important.
Okay, that's reasonable. I think it is essential Bergman, but it's one of those ones, yes, that the casual Bergman viewer is going to have a lot of trouble with. Mm-hmm. But I think it really speaks for where he is at this time in his life. And I always say this, but I'm really interested to see how it influences where he goes from here, because I don't think he's going to return to a film quite like Winter Light.
All that said, I still don't think it's essential.
All right, fair enough. But that brings us to the end of this episode, breaking down Bergman. I'm curious, for you guys who have seen Winter Light, what you think about it. Which side of the debate are you on?
And don't let my opinion discourage you from watching the film.
Don't let her opinion discourage you from watching any of Bergman's films. We'll be watching the third one in this trilogy, The Silence. That's our next film. So join us then on Breaking Down Bergman. And in the meantime, be sure to subscribe up there.
Yes, and visit us on Facebook. We'd love to hear your opinion.
And we will see you next time on Breaking Down Bergman.